Let's face it, for better or for worse, 2016 has been an incredibly eventful year and given us much to consider over the next 12 months. The growing pains of an increasingly globalized world have become more apparent than ever and have divided communities further than perhaps any point since the end of the Cold War 25 years ago. This year, economic inequality, climate change, mass immigration, and terrorism are all critical issues that have shockingly challenged our modern values and collective worldview, and have brought about difficult questions that we now and will continue to struggle to find answers for. The most impactful event on global politics this year has undeniably been the election of Donald Trump to the United States presidency. However, Trump's success is only one example of a broader movement towards right-wing populism across the world. In Great Britain, concerns over immigration and the economy led to a referendum vote to leave the European Union. In the Philippines, anti-establishment hardliner Rodrigo Duterte was elected to violently eliminate corruption and crime within the troubled country. In France, Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands, right-wing populist parties are gaining huge momentum due in part to numerous Islamic State terrorist attacks and an ongoing migrant crisis which has fueled fear and xenophobia across Europe. And in the United States, Trump's promise to stem the flow of illegal immigrants by building a wall and his claim to bring jobs back home through protectionist economic policies found great appeal with frustrated voters. So, what is causing this apparently sudden reactionary shift in ideology? One strong parallel that can be found between all of these events is the need for security. Whether it be security of keeping a stable job and living wage, security from immigrants or criminals, or security from terrorist attacks. There is a rapidly growing part of the population who no longer feel safe due to the social and economic changes that have resulted from globalization. Thanks to modern technology and Western liberal policies after the Cold War, people and economies across the globe have been more interconnected than ever. While this does have many obvious benefits to everyday life for much of the world's population, a massive evolution in society like what we have experienced in the last 25 years is bound to have unexpected consequences. In the United States, the loss of manufacturing jobs to more efficient automated machinery and to offshore factories in countries with less regulations like Mexico and China has angered much of the American blue-collar workforce. Although globalization allows previously underdeveloped nations like China and India to rapidly industrialize and catch up to richer Western economies, expanding the global workforce by hundreds of millions of newly industrialized laborers from across the world suddenly means that the top dogs like the United States can no longer maintain the economic dominance it once had around the middle of the 20th century. This effect manifested itself in the Rust Belt during the United States presidential election, with manufacturing and mining industries in the area throwing their support behind Mr. Trump's protectionist rhetoric and highlighting an overall backlash against globalization. Similar attitudes surfaced in Britain with support for the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, which claimed that the European Union was hampering British businesses through harsh regulation and allowing immigrants into the country en masse via the Schengen Agreement. This frustration was confirmed with the referendum vote to leave the European Union, which completed UKIP's primary goal. Outside the UK, many other European Union member nations have also seen increasingly hostile opinions towards the Schengen Agreement, due in part to rising Islamophobia from numerous Islamic State terrorist attacks and the recent spike in migrants from Syria and other primarily Muslim areas of the Middle East and Africa. As a strong supporter of the Schengen area and the EU as a whole, even German Chancellor Angela Merkel has found herself taking steps back from her traditionally liberal policies. Merkel is and will continue to be a highly controversial figure in Europe, with the rise of right-wing parties like Marine Le Pen's National Front in France. Le Pen is seen as the biggest existential threat to the EU, with many believing that her election to the French presidency in 2017 could be the beginning of the end for the Union. Le Pen has fed off many of the same fears as Brexit and Trump voters, especially those of Muslim immigration and cultural dilution, which resonate with the historically proud and ethnocentric French population. This should come as no surprise given the massive influx of migrants that were seen in 2016, with tens of thousands crossing into the EU from Turkey and the Mediterranean. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban intensified his efforts at rejecting immigration and free movement by reinforcing the border barrier he constructed in 2015 against his Croatian and Serbian borders and by also holding a referendum against the EU migrant quota. Although the referendum failed to turn out enough voters, those who did participate voted 98% against the EU immigration quota, showing just how intense right-wing populism in Europe can be. In France, the main opposition to Le Pen's National Front will be the centre-right candidate François Fillon, who won the primary in late November. Le Pen currently polls at around 35% against Fillon, but given the unexpected results of the Brexit vote and later on the United States election, all eyes will be on France for the first round of voting in April. In the Middle East, we have seen a significant power shift towards Russia, with the total recapture of Aleppo by the Russian and Iranian-supported Assad regime. Throughout the year, Russian air forces have relentlessly bombed the rebel-held areas of the city, despite condemnation from the United States and other Western nations. The declining influence of Washington in the Syrian war and surrounding region was apparent when, in December, negotiations for both the evacuation of Aleppo and later on a general ceasefire were successfully held with Turkey and Russia as the main guarantors, without any involvement from the United States. This marks a major power shuffle in the region, with Washington on the back foot as the White House prepares for the incoming Trump administration. An interesting and possibly decisive factor in the future of Washington's foreign policy is the nomination of Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State by Donald Trump. Tillerson was the CEO of oil giant ExxonMobil and has had a long and positive business relationship with Putin and Russia's state-owned oil enterprise, having been personally awarded Russia's Order of Friendship. With Turkey being a NATO member working so closely with Russia, and Tillerson's close history with Putin, there will be many questions for the Trump presidency in 2017 regarding the United States' relationship with Russia and the resulting balance of power in the Middle East. Outside of Syria, we have also seen numerous other international conflicts flare up and continue over the past year. The fight against Islamic State has continued on, and the terrorist group is expected to be shattered in 2017 as the battles for Mosul and Raqqa eventually end in their defeat. However, there is concern over the stability of Iraq in the power vacuum left by ISIS rule. With Kurdish Peshmerga, Iraqi armed forces, and various Shia militias having all been involved in the fighting, the recovery process for Iraq will be extremely delicate, and all parties involved will want to benefit as much as possible in the aftermath. In Yemen, a civil war started in 2015 shows no signs of ending anytime soon. Houthi rebels currently hold the capital Sana'a, with the government-led Hadi forces operating in exile with support from Saudi Arabia. Although largely overshadowed by the nearby Syrian conflict, the Yemeni civil war has been highly controversial, with many accusations of war crimes against both sides of the conflict. One of the most significant events in Yemen has been the bombing of a funeral by a Saudi-led force, resulting in over 110 deaths, most of which were civilian lives. The bombing drew international outrage and resulted in a cessation of arms sales to Saudi Arabia from the United States. In the Kashmir region between India and Pakistan, a long-standing territorial dispute reignited again in July. Multiple skirmishes occurred, which led to increased tensions between the two, with both nations ramping up nationalist rhetoric against the other. This concerning conflict, combined with the huge economic potential of India and recent attempts at monetary reform by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, means that India will be closely watched in anticipation of their global impact in 2017 and beyond. In July, part of the Turkish military launched a failed coup d'etat against the nationalist-run government of President Erdogan. The resulting backlash by the president resulted in widespread purges of the military, education, media, and civil services, despite accusations of authoritarianism from Turkey's NATO allies. For more details on this situation, you can look into my last video, which covers Turkey's recent political landscape. Some good news was made in South America, however, with the Colombian government agreeing to a peace deal with the communist FARC rebels in a bloody conflict that stretches back to the 1960s. The peace process was championed by Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts. One global issue that has seen plenty of international cooperation in 2016 is climate change. The United Nations Paris Agreement, which aims to gradually reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the world to sustainable levels, was successfully negotiated and went into effect in November. With the cooperation of China and India, who are two of the world's largest developing fossil fuel users, the agreement is a landmark achievement for the prevention of climate change and adoption of clean energy. In October, an amendment to the Montreal Protocol was also agreed to, which limited the use of hydrofluorocarbons that contribute to global warming. Canada in particular has emerged as one of the world's strongest advocates for clean energy, with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau beginning to truly push his environmentalist platform, who in October announced a new carbon pricing plan for the oil-rich country. Seeing the shifting tide towards clean energy, even oil giant Saudi Arabia has outlined plans for solar energy expansion as part of a wider set of national goals known as Saudi Vision 2030. 2016 was an immensely decisive and divisive year of global events, and it seems that 2017 will be no less significant. Hopes will be high for an end to the Syrian civil war and a swift defeat of the Islamic State in order to restore some stability to the devastated Middle East. However, many uncertainties still remain with the future role of Russia and how that will be impacted by the incoming Trump administration in Washington. The Western world will continue to look for solutions to the inequality and insecurity that has resulted from a globalized world, and will struggle to decide which path needs to be taken. The path of openness and liberalism, or the path of protectionism and isolation. Only time and votes will tell. But that's just my 2 cents.